Now, let me introduce the speaker of the day. Welcome, Mr. Anup Madhusudanan. Anup is like a brother to me. We were in the same class throughout our childhood until the 12th grade. One fine morning in the 12th grade, back in 1997, I introduced some hotkeys in computer for using WordStar and Lotus 123. If uh, if you don't know, WordStar and Lotus 123 are the equivalent of MS Word and Excel in which was prevalent and commonly used in 1980s and 90s. Not sure whether I know remember this, but I think it has changed everything in his career and transitioning to a computer wizard rather than becoming a biologist like me. Now Anup has got over 2 decades of experience in applying digital technologies to transform science. He is presently the Vice President of Digital at West Pharmaceutical Services. Previously, he was Vice President of Digital Strategy for Avendo Sciences and also was the Global Director for Digital at Merck Life Sciences and Sigma Aldrich. Now, most of us who work in a lab environment are probably familiar with the names Merck and Sigma Aldrich. He is also the founder of Share Your Fortune, a not-for-profit wealth sharing platform aimed towards driving social upliftment. So today, Anup will be introducing to us some cool stuff from the digital world. Please note, Anup is coming from an IT industry background, but he has approached me before several times with a great interest in applying digital technologies in fisheries science. Today, Anup, I have given you a great bunch of people to whom you can share your ideas and find people to collaborate. I welcome you again, Mr. Anup. Please, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Deepak, and thank you for the wonderful introduction. And hello everybody. Thank you for joining, and thank you for the opportunity. So, as Deepak mentioned, we have quite a bit of history in multiple areas, starting from the school. I still remember fondly, Deepak, all the abilities you had in composing music when you were back in school. That's probably my first memory about you. So maybe without much without spending a lot of time on anything else, let me start sharing my screen. And um, is so could you please make me a presenter, because I think I need the rights to share the screen.
Yeah.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
Please let me know once you can see the screen.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. So, as Deepak mentioned, I mean, this is a quick overview of some of the digital capabilities that is out there, and my perspective in terms of how this is being applied to fisheries and life sciences in general. Deepak already introduced me, so I'm going straight into the presentation. So, taking a step back, we often hear this term digital transformation, and the term digital itself is a broader term. There are multiple aspects here, multiple industries, and how the digital transformation is being applied in every industry is very unique. Now, having said that, we also know that a number of these new digital technologies are opening up new possibilities across multiple industries. So in 2017, I remember having a conversation with Chematica. So they actually developed a pretty exciting, molecular pathway analysis system that was acquired by Sigma Aldrich later, which was one of the major applications of artificial intelligence and deep learning in science. And almost at the same year, Google's AlphaGo defeated Lee Sedol. He was a Go champion at Go. So as you very much know, Go is a very intuitive game, and it was outside the hold of computer-based programming and computer technologies. So this triumph that Google made, that actually, got a lot of attention. So if you have Netflix, I definitely recommend you watching this series made out of this. The you know the whole idea that a computer algorithm or even a deep learning algorithm can really capture that intuition of a complex game like Go. And I would say the emotion of the human when you see that the evolution of computers is kind of unbelievable, right? It is all captured in that documentary. So if you search for Lee Sedol and Go, you will pretty much find that in Netflix. Now, a lot of things happened after 2017. One of the key aspect was, even in the area of science itself, Google beating a lot of other pharma companies for the protein folding competition. And even recently, you might have seen a press release from Google that the new alpha, the new alpha-driven protein folding system, AlphaFold, they were able to establish new benchmarks in the area of pharma and healthcare. I'm not even mentioning some of the other points there, but we are all seeing these tremendous changes happening, and now you see this evolution of new digital companies, even in traditional industries like space science and rocket science. This year, actually, SpaceX was able to beat established companies like Boeing for deploying their spacecrafts to the International Space Station, and that was another major triumph of applying digital in the right way. Now, when you really think about fisheries and aquatic sciences, as a whole, a lot of innovations are happening, based on, based on what you see out there. Essentially, a marine littering detection, solution is being developed. This is a project where you have drones flying around on top of, the ocean, figuring out floating waste. Then, Canada funded a whale protection program to track endangered, whale species from the skies. And most of these projects actually use a number of computer vision algorithms and deep learning algorithms. And, on the other side, I mean, one of the other interesting startup that I found is Fishcoin. So what Fishcoin does, they are actually trying to bring in trackability and traceability into the marine life supply chain, like the supply chain using technologies like blockchain. So which is again another interesting dimension. So let's probably have a broader look at what are some of these digital technologies that are evolving based on PwC. And most of us are familiar with a number of these points here. On a broader sense, artificial intelligence, we see the evolution of augmented reality. Everybody is familiar with Bitcoin, and blockchain is the underlying technology that enables Bitcoin. We see, drones and automated vehicles that we are using widely for farming as well as for underwater surveillance. We see this evolution of 5G and the Internet of Things around it. Amazing progress in areas like robotics, where you combine robotic systems with deep learning based models to accomplish unseen efficiencies, virtual reality for simulations, as well as for a number of other use cases like training and onboarding. 3D printing. Recently, I was going through a press release from a startup who is using 3D printing to print edible material from vegetable, substrate. That kind of gives you the same texture of salmon, right? Without actually using any salmon. So 3D printing for food. These are some amazing technologies that are evolving. So today I would be focusing more on the artificial intelligence space, and a little bit on some of the other technologies like blockchain and Internet of Things. So, this is a very interesting, diagram that shows the differences between artificial intelligence as a broader term versus what exactly is machine learning and what exactly is deep learning. So artificial intelligence, started evolving around, 1950s after the perceptron model was introduced. It provided a number of efficiencies and created a lot of excitement and prompted a lot of discovery and research. The idea, even in 1950s, was we would evolve computers sooner towards the intelligence level of a human. But obviously that enthusiasm, slowed down a little bit because the systems were not that efficient. We had problems where the systems kind of lost memory after training it for some time. So, obviously the interest further continued to some extent. The machine learning branch evolved. Again, a lot of discoveries and algorithms were being developed. The whole idea that you can actually leverage data sets for figuring out patterns, gave birth to a lot of algorithms, during the time of, I would say, from 1990s to 2000s. And in 2012, something really exciting happened. In 2012, a new paper was introduced, that kind of changed the whole paradigm that was there, in artificial intelligence so far. This specific paper, Hoffman and some of the other scientists presented a paper that gave birth to this new branch called deep learning. So what is really, really unique about deep learning is that it automates certain aspects of machine learning, like feature extraction, which makes some of the tasks like classification really, really easy. So let's probably take a step back and quickly go through, some of these machine learning applications, and we will examine a little bit how exactly this translates into, fisheries and aquatic science. So I'll probably start with a very simple machine learning application. This is association analysis, right? You see this every day. You go to Amazon, and Amazon recommends you the products to purchase based on your past behavior. And now that same model or the same idea can be used, for association analysis in multiple areas. For example, you can use that to figure out the co-occurrence probability of, species, right? So you could say that, if you have a data set that kind of articulates the co-occurrence instances between multiple species, based on that, you can really come up with a probability model that will tell you what is the probability of finding eel if you are finding beluga or something like that. So this is pretty much a very simple application, the association analysis. Now, moving a bit further, essentially there are two broader branches, within machine learning. One is supervised learning. In supervised learning, one way to think about this is, let's say that you really want to classify the species of fish. The way you start in supervised learning is you start with collecting this massive data sets, and you do the manual labeling, right? So you will start with, let's say, images of 10 different species. And for each image, you will, specifically label that this, fish is species A or this fish is species B. So you pretty much do the labeling in terms of, when you really apply supervised learning algorithms. Now, within supervised learning, I specifically wanted to talk about classification. Now, what is classification? let's take a simple example. Let's take this simple example of building a simple classifier. I don't know, if you ever saw this show, the minimum viable product MVP, it's a fun show. They have a simple product that one of the startup is building, hot dog or no hot dog, right? The app will tell you if you scan a picture or take a picture of a hot dog or something else, it will tell you whether it is a hot dog or not a hot dog. So let's build something like that, right? So for a moment, assume that you have two categories of pictures. One category that actually that is pretty much the pictures of sea bass, and the other one, it's pretty much the pictures of cod. Now, how do you really build a classifier? I mean, this is not machine learning. This is just like simple logic. So how do you really build a classifier? One way for you to do that, you can really take these images and you can examine the image, and you can pretty much determine what features you need to essentially build a classifier. And you might say, okay, one of the feature is length. I have to write down the length of the species or the image that I see. The other one might be the width. The third one might be the weight, the area of fins, the mean spectral reflectance, and you could name it. I mean, so you kind of evaluate these features, and then for every a picture, you can really form a feature vector. A feature vector is nothing other than an array of these feature values that you already identified. Now, for a moment, assume that you now build the feature vectors for a number of pictures for fishes in both categories. And now you plot that in a simple, x1, x2 graph. So for simplicity, let's assume that we are only going to consider two features, x1 and x2. We are just going to leave out all the features. But you plotted all the values, and you will get a simple graph like that. Now, classification is pretty much figuring out all the blue ones are cod, and all the red ones are sea bass, right? And you clearly see that distinction. So you literally have to figure out how to separate them, and using a pen, you can pretty much draw, using a Sharpie or something, you can pretty much draw a line that kind of classifies these points into categories. So this is the idea of classification. Now, when you really have more features, when you really want to apply all the features, you cannot really do that in paper. So you have to use a machine learning library like TensorFlow or PyTorch or even basic Python to really build your classifier logic. But here the key aspect is you are doing the feature extraction in a manual way. And that is very tedious because it is very difficult for someone to sit down and go through all these images, figuring out the features. Now, what changed after deep learning was introduced was the fact that this feature detection and extraction itself became automated. So that's something that we will talk about later. But the fundamental difference of normal machine learning versus deep learning is one of the key differences is this. In a normal machine learning model, you are responsible for defining the features, and you are responsible for figuring out the values. In deep learning, you give the image as an input, and the deep learning network is intelligent enough to really figure out the features. And these are not necessarily the features with a semantic meaning. These are potentially features that are based on edges or based on certain aspects of the image. And we will talk about that a bit more in detail later. So that is pretty much the difference. When you do classification, that is one of the key differences to keep in mind, rather than using standard machine learning models now the space evolved so much that you can use deep learning models for automated feature extraction. So, when you have these massive images, you have to do some pre-processing, and then you have to do the feature extraction, and then you have to do the classification. And that's pretty much what we just did here. Now, there are a number of interesting applications for this, right? One of the interesting applications that I have seen is from Google. So Google came up with this Tidal project, and they really wanted to help indexing the fish, population, and also figure out the different species. So they built a camera system, as you see on the right, and based on that, you can actually see how they are doing real-time classification of different species, and they are doing a little bit more there. But fundamentally, I thought this is a simple way to show how you can really apply the classification algorithms when you really have a live feed. So based on the incoming videos, you can create a pipeline which extracts each frame from the video and then do the analysis and almost plot it back real time. So now we talked about classification. Let's probably talk about regression. What exactly is regression? So it's pretty much a prediction model. So normally you start with a data set, right? So you might say that I have this data set, and can I figure out the weight from all the other parameters, right? So what you see here is the species, the weight, length 1, length 2, length 3, then the height and width. So you might ask, is there a correlation between weight and all the other parameters? And that's pretty much something that we would like to figure out. And we want to build a model that can predict the weight if you give all the other parameters to that model in future. And this is possible using regression. So, so normally you start with a data set. And our intent is to really build a weight prediction model using linear regression, right? Then you start exploring the variables and the distribution. So if you see that, the weight values, you see how the weight value is being distributed from, on a percentile basis. You can actually examine all the other parameters as well, like length 1, length 2, length 3. And then, you can pretty much explore the correlation between all these variables. So you could say, show me the correlation graph and tell me, how each of these parameters or variables correlates with the other variables in my data set. And it gives you a correlation score. So after examining this, you proceed towards building a model. And again, you have to use a proper framework for that. Two common frameworks that you can start leveraging is PyTorch and the Torch and TensorFlow, which are pretty popular. So, but fundamentally, this is the idea of regression. You use the variable values of a data set, and based on that, you can predict or build a model. You can build a model that will predict, a value. We all know about the general regression logic that we can really apply in Excel and all that. So this is again an extension of that fundamental logic. Now you can use this for a lot of different aspects. This was an open source library that I saw where they are using, obviously they are using some deep learning algorithms, but also some regression models to do the pose estimation and the body pose estimation and some of the other parameters for a rat, a fish, a bee. So this is pretty interesting that they are able to almost predict the path or the potential movement path of a rat there, right? So these kind of applications, are possible through regression models. Now, we talked about supervised learning. Let's probably talk about unsupervised learning. What exactly is that? So if you see the picture on the top, it's a bunch of cartoon animals. You have, essentially, you see the parrot. You have a fish. You have, basically birds and fishes on the left side. Now, what exactly an unsupervised learning model does, it takes this input data and it will automatically figure out clusters from this input data. Now, the interesting aspect is no human involved labeling is required to do this, which is fascinating because think about the scenario that you have an amazing wealth of image data for a number of different species. And you really want to start segmenting them, right? You might want to say, hey, I have, let's say, 10,000 images of fish in one of the folders. Now, how do I move all the sea bass pictures to one folder and the cod pictures to another folder? In that case, you can actually leverage unsupervised learning. So you take an unsupervised learning algorithm, you feed these images into that unsupervised model, and automatically it will figure out, how to do the clustering. So clustering is a great example or a great application for unsupervised learning. So again, the next element, I would probably talk a little bit about reinforcement learning as well. So reinforcement learning is very much an evolving area within machine learning. So what is really interesting about reinforcement learning, think about it as like training your dog, right? So you want to teach your dog to, pick, let's say, newspaper for you like every day morning. What do? You, give a reward to the dog whenever the dog is picking up the newspaper or a frisbee or something. And if the dog is not picking that up, you won't give the dog any reward. So through a number of steps, you train the dog that if I'm going to pick the newspaper or the frisbee, then I'm going to get the reward. And you can really do this with computer agents. So an agent is, you can assume that it is a brain, and we start training an agent to really do a specific task. So you might say, okay, perform this task, and if you are successful in doing that, or if you are moving towards that task, I'm going to reward you. Now, if you are not moving towards that final goal, I am going to punish you or penalize you. So over time, the agent learns how to do things. So there was this interesting story that Facebook built a small robot. It is a very small bot, a physical bot, and connected that with a simple reinforcement learning algorithm. I think the name was called Grasshopper or something. So just by giving feedback, Grasshopper learned, how to jump up and how to even, rotate when it jumps up, which was fascinating because it's a very simple robot and you are just giving this feedback through voice saying that good or bad. And based on that, the algorithm trained itself to do certain tasks. And you see this in, a lot of different areas. One exciting platform to explore this further, it's called OpenAI Gym. So OpenAI Gym provides you an environment for you to play with reinforcement learning environments. So the first one that you see on top, it is called a card-poll environment. So in a card-poll environment, your objective is to, teach how to balance, teach the agent how to balance that poll, right? So the card is moving either to right or to left, and those are the actions. And you start randomly, and if the pole is not falling down, you are going to reward the agent. If the pole is going to fall down, then you're going to penalize the cart agent. And over time, the cart agent learns how to hold the pole straight. Now, the other example is this Atari based gaming system that OpenAI took, and they were able to train a computer agent to play all the games in that Atari gaming kit. I'm pretty sure all of us played this paddle and ball game. So the paddle is the agent, right? So the paddle is moving and it is hitting the ball, as you can see. Now the paddle, we are actually training it using reinforcement learning algorithms and by providing feedback. And over time, it learns, how to play, most of the games in Atari. Now the last one is an interesting task that you're giving to a robot. Let's say you want to fold a cloth, and this is something that my mom always asked me to do. Can you really figure out a robot that can fold my clothes, or fold the clothes? So essentially, this is a simple imagination of a robot doing that, and actually in this case, it was able to fold some of the clothes in a very interesting manner, again through to some extent applying reinforcement learning algorithms. So this is a very evolving area, and the combining reinforcement learning with deep learning is opening up a lot of new possibilities. So as we are moving close to the time, let me speed up a little bit. So there are essentially two aspects I would like to talk about feature extraction. So this is something that you could remember when you hear about the feature extraction and deep learning. In a normal machine learning scenario, the feature extraction is pretty much done in a manual way, or you have to write custom algorithms, and even at times you have to inspect the data to figure out the right features to use. In a deep learning framework, you give the image as an input, and the features that you have to extract is pretty much determined by the deep learning network. Now, there are a number of deep learning applications for fisheries, and I recommend you reading this ArcSieve paper that talks about the deep learning applications for fisheries. And as you can see, one of the key aspects is to have a good data set for you to work upon. And once you have that base data set, based on that, you can really start evolving use cases. Some of the interesting use cases that you see below, again, about the fish biomass or behavior and welfare monitoring, the water quality prediction, feeding decisions, species classification. Now, if you really look at these ArcSieve papers, there are a number of papers there that talks about multiple use cases, about fish identification, species classification. So I highly recommend you going through, some of these papers, unless you are familiar with that idea. I already showed you an example of how you can really start leveraging a video feed for extracting frames. And in this case, the picture that you see from the video to the labeling, we are trying to detect whether the particle that we observed, whether it is a feed or whether it's an actual fish. And then based on that, we can take it through a classifier. So that is another simple example. So let me talk quickly a little bit about blockchain. So what is blockchain? So we are moving from AI to blockchain a little bit here. So blockchain, the simple version is it is a shared ledger. What exactly that means? For a moment, think that there are no banks, right? For a moment, let's assume that if I am actually giving, let's say, $1 to Deepak, for a moment, assume that I have a way to magically transfer it to Deepak in a way that both of our wallets get synced automatically. Now, blockchain is exactly that. Blockchain enables a shared ledger between parties without a middleman to establish the trust. You need a bank. In a normal scenario, you need a bank because the bank essentially makes sure that the transactions are in order. If somebody is giving you $1, they can actually give you $1 only if they have $1 in their account or in their hand, and bank ensures that. In a blockchain scenario, it is peer-to-peer. So as it is peer-to-peer, the algorithms really take care of the, the delivery and the guarantee that, the transaction is properly synced between the two parties, also by establishing the trust. So one simple way to look at this is, let's assume that A wants to send money to B. Now the transaction is represented as an online block, right? The block might have the receiver address. It might have a sender information. Now the block it will be sent out to all the parties in the network, because the network would be having multiple parties or nodes in that. Now each of them have to do some work to to figure out whether this transaction is valid or not. But having said that, let's assume that they are doing some work to figure it out, and then they approve the the block to be added to the chain. Now this is the interesting part. The chain is pretty much a shared state that exists across everybody's ledger. Now when you really evolve this conversation, normally you really think about blockchain in terms of currency or crypto, but that is not necessarily required, right? You can pretty much use any digital asset instead of money, and instead of a transaction, you can actually execute any contract. A contract is a logic or a function, so you can pretty much guarantee that a function or a contract in a blockchain will get executed at the level of my wallet and also at the level of Deepak's wallet. And this is guaranteed. So I can establish contracts or functions in blockchain that guarantees these transactions in a trustable way. So what that means is, let's assume that I'm actually borrowing $1 from Deepak. Now, if I have a contract that establishes that I need to give this dollar back to Deepak at some point, it is guaranteed in the chain, and there is a record that would exist in the chain. So now there are a number of discussions around how to leverage blockchain for solving some of the supply chain issues. When you really think about fisheries, and one of the interesting initiative that I saw, I mentioned about the Fishcoin. So Fishcoin is aspiring to establish a blockchain ledger to connect all the parties in the ecosystem. So in that way, when you are really, if you are really a farmer, you can really provide inputs with respect to the water condition and some of the other parameters, when you really produce, and then it moves down the supply chain. So each gate it gets to, you can actually enter that information back in the chain. And when finally a consumer buys the produce, you can actually verify that this is how the whole, the whole movement happened from one side to the other for the item. So now this is really interesting, and it is an area where trust can be established across multiple players. Now, if I go to some of my last slides, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Internet of Things within fisheries. Most of you are familiar with the Internet of Things, and this is again a very evolving field, especially with 5G and all coming in. But when you really think about Internet of Things, there are three elements. One is the sensors or devices that you use for monitoring something. Then there is a gateway that transmits that data back to the cloud. And then you have a cloud layer, which takes this data and processes it. And it can also give information downstream. Now, a simple example is pretty much, monitoring supplies So you can pretty much say that I'm going to establish 2 monitoring towers, and I have sensors or cameras that actually monitors the fish movement, and I can transmit that data back to the cloud through a gateway. So one of the interesting protocols that is being adopted more and more, it's LoRaWAN, because of the fact that it is a long-range radio protocol. So if you're really needing protocols that would solve distance problems, LoRaWAN is one of the areas to look at. So a little bit about robotics, a number of applications, that is out there. One is pretty much for cleaning up the waste in oceans. That is the first one. Now, the second one is actually a robot that can prepare a crab. So you see that how it is actually processing that crab, and later packaging it. Then this is a Mindray, or the surveillance robot developed by the Singapore University. So that is one of the interesting surveillance robots that I have seen. And there are more applications for processing and packaging all around. But what is interesting is when you really take all this and combine it together, you can really start training machines what to do, but combining machine vision, by combining deep learning, artificial intelligence, and pretty much transfer this knowledge from a virtual world into a real world. And that is where the possibilities are. So for example, on the left side, you will see that the robot is playing Jenga, but it was trained in a virtual space. And we transferred that, in this example, the authors transferred that learning to a real robot. Actually, it was optimized using the training data that was generated from the virtual environment. Now, the right side is a dance party from the Boston Dynamics robots, after they learned synchronous dancing moves, which was always interesting. So that is the last slide in my presentation. So I'll probably, pause here a little bit and maybe give it back to Deepak to open up for questions.
Thanks very much, Anup. Can you turn on your video so I can see you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, okay. I mean, everyone should see you. Okay, so thanks very much, Anup, for the excellent talk, and really interesting technologies there. I'm sure there'll be people having questions for him. But before going to the discussion, please leave a feedback for us. I put a feedback link in the chat box. Please provide us a feedback. It is for improving our, our webinar quality. And we would also like to announce if any of you are happy to volunteer for AFS talks, just let us know. We'll be interested to know how you can contribute to us. There are a host of activities that we are looking forward to deliver through AFS talks. So if you think you have any value that you can contribute, we'll be very interested to know from you. Please contact us. So let's go into the discussion part. We have 15 minutes for the discussion, but depending on if you have more questions, we can push it a little bit more. So I will enable all of you to unmute yourself so you can actually ask questions. A few questions in the chat box. Before that, let me ask one question to you, Anu. So the reinforced learning is part of the deep learning, right?
So, when we started the whole area of reinforcement learning, when the initial algorithms were developed, deep learning was not necessarily in the picture. So there were certain algorithms, that was developed for general reinforcement learning. But one of the major changes that happened recently is introducing deep learning into reinforcement learning, which gave birth to this deep reinforcement learning, which changed a lot of things. right?
Yeah.
So that's pretty much, one of the major changes happen in that area. So today we have algorithms like deep Q, networks, and then that space is constantly evolving. But that is what made a lot of this possible, I would say, in the last 8 years.
Yeah. So when you gone through that, all those, from the very simple methods to the advanced level, from associative learning, supervised and unsupervised. So in all those categories, we could clearly see application of established statistical theories. Okay, so you talked about regression, and regression can be very simple and very very complex. And also, you could see when you come to unsupervised, even though you didn't mention, I think it's something close to K clustering techniques, and maybe there are more. But when it comes to reinforced learning, I was a bit confused. Is there any real established statistical applications in when it comes to reinforced learning? The closest I could come is with the individual based modeling techniques, but then there's case specific. I guess it is that it depends on what you're developing, and you actually tweak all the algorithm and the even your mathematical steps in it, I guess. Is that all right?
Right. So, you could argue that to some extent you can actually apply some alpha beta pruning and tree-based models to, really get to reinforcement learning to some extent, right? Because you're always figuring out how to optimize the path, to the right, goal. So, some earlier developments were made, in certain areas, but the application of vision-based algorithms to capture the context and leverage that as a baseline for the agent training. I would say vision-based, or vector-based input models that is what enabled actually, I would say, massive progress in the area of reinforcement learning. So for example, when exactly this actually suddenly got a lot of attention was when I believe OpenAI, they actually took the Atari console and built a reinforcement learning agent to play all those games, in most cases better than humans. So if you really go to OpenAI, and install Jim and the Atari console player, you can pretty much run that in your own machine. Why they were able to do that? Because of the fact that we can really, start recording the images, and using deep learning architectures, you are able to do the feature extraction. So in a way, you have a way to perceive that environment much better than you ever did earlier, right? And then tie that back with the whole, goal-based approach. So if you really ask me, all the previous success based on pure statistical models, I don't necessarily know if there is a specific, statistical approach that I can quote there, but
Maybe you could
all the
say
reason.
there's a process of several steps, which is like, in a generalized
Right.
way. Yeah, rather than
Right.
be going very specific. Yeah, yeah. So we have
Right.
some other questions here. Neetu, I don't know what she mean. Can it be in local languages? Would you like to make it clear, Neetu? Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Can it be use this app, but language this app is we have to if we have to fish describe करना हो तो how to local person use this app? Is there any local language or Hindi or any other language can use in this app?
Do you get the question,
So
Anup?
yeah, I would
think
try reframing that. So maybe Nitu, your question is, from from a localization standpoint, how do you really, bring in some of the localization aspects into that? So, I just scratched the whole. I would say I just scratched the surface when it comes to the deep learning, frameworks and deep learning areas. I haven't even mentioned anything about the language models. So one of the biggest accomplishments that we had in the last few years is in the area of language processing, and there were some neural network architectures like transformers that came up, and then it evolves to new models like attention-based networks. So, what exactly you do in these networks is you actually build the context. For example, let's assume that you have a string, right? You have a natural language string, be it in Hindi or be it in any other vernacular language or even in English. So these models are capable of capturing the context and then generate, I would say, the conversation based on that. A great example is, I would say, the new GPT-3 model that came out of OpenAI, I would say, in the beginning of the year. And everybody got surprised with the capabilities that GPT-3 is having, right? So I really recommend you to go to YouTube and see, what are some of these applications of GPT-3. Now, you would find a lot of great applications for transformer architectures and specifically attention architectures for local language processing. If your question is how exactly that applies into fisheries and aquatic science,
yes,
I don't necessarily have an answer there. I mean, I think we probably need to brainstorm more and discuss a little bit more on the applications. I mean, my domain expertise in this area is very limited. I probably learn quite very little in the aquatic and fisheries areas when it comes to the domain, but there might be great applications, right? I mean, for example, I have seen models where transformers are used for molecule similarity prediction or for protein ligand like binding prediction. So I would assume a lot of applications would be there, especially in the area of aquatic medicine and areas like that.
Your is very good, but your presentation is really good. But if it is only one problem, application have is language problem.
Understood. Okay.
If it's
so
solved,
Deepak, then the question is
that's a large area.
right.
Okay.
All right. So the next question is, how will the model handles the classification of an unknown species? Srinath, would you like to come and ask the question?
That has not been asked by me.
Reshma, then I think you're Reshma.
Hi, sir. Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you.
I can hear Reshma. Yep.
Okay. How will the model handle the classification of unknown species? Like, if we create a model that is for the classification of Indian mackerel and a starfish, if an unknown species suddenly came up, how will the model handles? Like,
right. So that's a really good question. Now, for the model to, so if it is a classification problem, then you need to label the data and you need to train the model, and the classification categories have to be predefined, right? So if you're actually providing a new species, if it is not matching with any of the species that you already trained the model for, the model will say, okay, I cannot really include this in any of the non-models, so it's an unknown model. So that is a classification model. Now, when you really think about clustering or unsupervised training, what the model can do is you are not labeling anything. You are just giving it a bunch of images. And based on the similarity metrics, I'm pretty sure, Deepak, you will remember some k-means clustering and aspects like that. Based on the similarity metrics, it can actually it can start positioning the images. Let's assume that there is a big virtual grid, right? So it is the same way you look at a picture and you say that this is an eel, and you place it on the top left. Then you get a chord, you will place it on the bottom right, right? In the same way, if it is a clustering model, it can pretty much identify the features and place it near the, place it near the picture with similar features. So in the end of the day, if you really look at that grid, all the images with the similar features will come together.
Okay, sir.
Does that answer your question?
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yeah.
I have more questions here. I think I can combine two of them. So, Suresh asked, can you please highlight some examples of using these technologies in fisheries, including fish trade or even potential uses? I think you were already showing all those in the slides. Let me jump into the next question. So Mr. Amod is asking, which is the best way when one wants to learn the basics of all these deep learning, machine learning in combination with fisheries at practical level? Any thoughts how can be this taken forward, maybe later in detailed way? So he actually want to learn the actual technology than understanding. And I think I know was going through like a bird eye view. So he's asking where he can actually learn and apply the techniques. It's the best
Yep.
place. Yeah.
That is a really good question, and and I can answer that. So I would suggest you to really start taking an introductory course on machine learning in Coursera or some of the platforms like that. But most importantly, I would really recommend you to start learning Python. Python is a programming language, and learning programming is in fact really easy. There are multiple ways to start doing that, but I would highly recommend you to start learning a programming language, and I would recommend Python because your interests are in machine learning. So again, in platforms like Coursera, there are really good Python courses, and you don't even need anything specific for that. There are built-in tutorials available, and once you go through Python a little bit, understand the basic concepts, then it is really easy for you to jump in and understand the domain a little bit through a programmer's lens, because that is the real way to test things and evolve. So from a science perspective, we always build a hypothesis, we test it, and we evolve. So it will actually give you the right tools and semantics around it, because machine learning is a very hands-on domain, and you can learn theory, but then you also have this high-level Lego kind of building blocks. So if you know Python, something like Python, you can pretty much start putting these blocks together in a very easy way. There are even some visual machine learning building models that you can use. I can actually send some of that information later, but those are good good to understand. But if you really want to get involved and start applying some of this, step one, learn the basics of Python coding, by taking a course in Coursera or so. Step two, take a course in Coursera about machine learning. And step three, start learning a little bit of TensorFlow or PyTorch. So those are few Python-based frameworks for building machine learning applications.
Very good.
If you allow, can I ask in detail somewhat more, if you allow?
Yeah, please.
Sure.
Amod this side. Yeah, hi,
Yep.
sir. So I will just rephrase the question again. Thanks a lot for providing information. So on practical basis, what I wanted to understand is right now I am already into the trade, into the seafood trade. And while meeting many of the people across different location, across different conferences or across different arenas, many a times what I'm getting a feedback like there are many investors are also aligned who are always interested how this AI can be connected to the fisheries level. So, if I have to go in deeper understanding for this programming also, it may take a lot of time. So another question of mine is, if someone is already into the business, seafood business, and in that side, through your company, if you do have the excellent knowledge of all this machine learning also, whether there is any scope or any chance where we can have some sort of discussion where we can check how the both expertise can be combined to check few of the experiments, particularly into this fisheries and aquaculture level using this AI technology also.
Yeah,
Maybe that
absolutely.
might be
That's a
the
really good.
different discussion, but just I wanted to ask you here because for the first time something like this has been arranged, and I just do not wanted to miss the question to be asked. Thank you, sir.
No, absolutely, absolutely. So so I kind of thought about the question as you were interested in learning, but absolutely. So the answer is yes. I am not necessarily
Just
so
before
the
you
organization that I
answer,
yeah,
I think
sure.
why Amod asked that question is because there is no one else actually to guide us. Probably you are the first person coming into the field. I guess so. So yeah.
Yeah, Deepak, means how it is happening. No, like I involved quite deeply across international level also through different seafood media. So how it is happening for different kind of investments, even whenever we are approaching through our company for different functions of the fisheries, many a times many people or the big time investor they are focusing a lot on how this AI can be connected to the fisheries or aquaculture. Then they are more interested to take those things in a very faster way, and that is quite a potential field to be looked for in coming time. So the
Right.
interest is more, and thanks for aligning this. Yeah, sir, over to you.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So my answer there is, there is a lot of opportunity in this space if you really think about it from an entrepreneurial mindset. What are some of the opportunities out there? The problems. So if you're really looking for a partner to help you do that, I don't do that directly because my focus is very much in the healthcare space. I work for West Pharma, which needs my full time and attention. But I'm also really close to a number of startups and the whole ecosystem. I can definitely connect you with some of the right folks who can really help you frame the problem and the technology solutions around it. There is a very vibrant startup ecosystem around artificial intelligence, machine learning, and applications for that. So I can absolutely help you frame the problem and also connect you with the right people. So my recommendation is, send me an invite in LinkedIn, so you can search for my name, or I can paste that in the chat window if
Yeah,
that
definitely.
helps. But okay.
Yeah. So I will leave it at there. Modi can continue discussions with Anup in private, maybe. Srinath, I will put a link of Coursera on machine learning. So if anyone want to go and click on that. Jamia from CIFT, do we need to know coding or programming for machine learning like AI? So I think you already answered it. Yes, definitely you need. Srinath, you have a question where exactly the information regarding the transactions will be saved. I think it's the blockchain related question. Srinath, do you want to comment?
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah.
Yes, Srinath, we can hear you.
Yeah, Anu, actually, just to make it simple, if suppose I am an entrepreneur and I wanted to start a supply base, a supply chain based blockchain kind of marketing system, where I should exactly, what should be my starting point for that? and how I can make sure that the things will not go some kind of hacking kind of thing in the future, and where exactly the informations will be kept, and do I need to purchase some kind of services from IBM kind of or Wipro kind of companies?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Now, I also would read the question. You also asked where exactly the transactions will be saved. So, the interesting aspect there is that every transaction or a log of every transaction would be stored at the wallet level for every user. Now, what is a wallet? A wallet is, I would say it's a simple program, right? And that program has got some storage. So you can either install that wallet in your computer, or you can actually host your wallet in a cloud. Now that is just your wallet. Now a blockchain needs a lot of different wallets like that, because every node, every party who is getting involved, they would be having their wallet. So there is the storage itself is not centralized, right? I mean, there is nothing like a centralized storage. So from that perspective, it is very different than cloud. But this nodes itself, the wallet itself, you can either host it in your computer, or you can actually host it in a remote system. That's up to you. So that is about the storage part of it. Now, your question about how do you start? Blockchain is now available as a commodity. Again, the prerequisite there is to really start understanding one of the blockchain platforms. So I would really recommend you to start with the Ethereum platform. It is ETHREUM, Ethereum. And why that is an interesting platform, because they actually allow you to build applications on top of the Ethereum blockchain without any upfront investments. You can pretty much provision your own Ethereum network as a separate instance if you want to, but today you can just start building your applications in the Ethereum beta network or something like that, because there is nothing like I would say a centralized storage or anything. This is a decentralized network. But if you go to Ethereum, I think it is ethereum.org. They have a programming language called Solidity, and you can use Solidity to really start building your logic, your contracts, but you would be using the Ethereum blockchain. So once you go through those concepts, then it is probably much more easier for you to decide whether you really need I would say it's a side network, or you have to host or provision your own Ethereum network. I mean, those, or even there are other platforms as well, like IBM has got a Stellar Lumens platform, which is again open source. So you can take that and start there as well. But starting with Ethereum is probably a good way for you to get involved and understand the concepts before you go further. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, thanks, Anu. Thanks, Miss.
Yeah.
Amrita, I have a question. Could you please explain something about AlphaFold and how it solves protein folding? Would you like to come in, Amrita?
Hi, Anup.
Amrita.
I don't have much to ask, but recently, I'm starting my career in proteomics and a little bit of vaccine development. And I hear this a lot. AlphaFold by DeepMind has solved this problem of protein folding and so on. So I was just curious to know what's this AlphaFold and how it helped, because somewhere in your initial slides, like slide number 2 or something, you mentioned the word AlphaFold. So I thought you might have some good explanation for this.
Right. So it's a very interesting question. So keeping it really, really simple, all of us know that the proteins that are involved and the folding of these proteins kind of drives the functions of our cell, right? So the way the proteins fold and the way they, form the structures, in response to, I would say, the amino acids that forms the protein. I mean, some of them move away from water, some of them move towards the water, and based on that, the protein folds. So now the question is, how do you really figure out the right kind of folding to make the cell do certain things, right? So can you really figure out the right structure for certain proteins? Why that is interesting? There are like numerous applications, but a simple application is probably for figuring out the bindings, right? You need to understand how a specific protein would fold to figure out, how you can really make, a drug or something that would bind to that. So if you can see my screen, what AlphaFold does, and you can really Google for that and read about that in DeepMind. So it's a simple animation of a gradient descent method for predicting the structure of Cas13, target, T1008. And the way they do that, obviously they haven't published the whole algorithm as open source, so I cannot really comment on how exactly it happens. But the way it happens is based on the article that they published on that. What they do is they have the protein sequences, and then there is a neural network, which is trained based on the non-protein sequences, right? So the neural network is pretty much trained based on the non-faulting data, and based on that, you give a new protein sequence to the neural network, and what it does is it actually does a couple of things. I mean, I think in the latest version they are using some attention-based mechanism. So they predict the distances, and also they predict the angles, and then they combine it and come up with a structure for the folded protein. So I would highly recommend you reading this article and maybe checking out. There is a GitHub repository that exists, which will let you experiment with this a little bit. But that's probably a good way to like get more information into that. But on a high level, this is pretty much the information that I believe that we can discuss within this time.
Yeah, I have noted it.
Hopefully it's helpful.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Anup.
Absolutely.
So Anup have put his LinkedIn link in the chat box. So if anyone would like to contact him, you can get in touch with him through LinkedIn. Do anyone else have a question? I can see a hand raised. I don't know really. You come on. Who's it?
Hey, this is Pratish. It's not just a question, but just to add what Anup was saying to Amod. There are I'm not sure what's happening in India, but in United States we have a huge blockchain thing happening where Walmart already have been collaborating with IBM to come up with a traceability, especially for all the food products, not just the seafood. And that will essentially or eventually extend that into a seafood arena more. And also, right now there are studies going on to identify the fish labeling, and that's one of the species fraud is one of the main area that the seafood trade is experiencing. And right now there's a lot of initiative now to use AI to identify the particular species. That something is going on, Amod, if you are interested. There's a number of studies going on right now, and also I am also designing some study with one of my students to do the same. It's only in the very initial phase of development. So if you want to talk, we can talk later.
I appreciate what you all said. Like you now mentioned, so I will bring some of the things here on some platform as well. Like being the board member of Friend of the Sea, during particularly this COVID-19, we have even developed this blockchain model, particularly for the traceability. But as a one of the third party certification, we are not the core into the technical sides of those things. Having been on that board, few of the aspects I am handling, but other than that, here back in India, I am also involved in the seafood business. So what more I am interested in, how these blockchain or AI studies can be clubbed together for the practical aspects or practical gaining for the seafood business. Because as you exactly mentioned out during one of our global webinars as well, we have talked about how this fraud is happening and how that can be recognized through some of these techniques or through some genetical techniques. So in Italy, we are doing certain studies wherein through application of some genetic studies, it is possible for the companies even to identify those frauds. But I really appreciate that you come forward here and given the information. I will be more than happy to connect with you in person. My both the details have been mentioned in the chat. If you can just share your details, I will connect in person, or you can just text me on details. Thanks a lot.
Sure.
Thank you, Amod. Rise, is that really a hand raised? Do you have a question?
So I think I think was it a mistake or not? I'm not sure. That hand raise was from the beginning of the.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No worries. But if anyone else have quickly, maybe one question. If anyone have, really. Not much. I think so.
Yeah, just one more thing. At the moment in India, whether any of the companies on practical levels are putting these application into the fishery sites in particular, other than the Aqua Connect, which is there in Andhra Pradesh. Other than that, in any of the companies, is anyone having any idea that some companies putting these things on practical levels or on commercial level?
I'm not aware of. I don't know. I don't know. Anu can.
Anyone, if anyone knows, can help Anumod.
Yeah, so honestly, I'm not necessarily close to the industry here in India, so I cannot answer that question. I hope so, but but I'm not really aware of any specific companies.
Perhaps hello. Hello.
Yeah. Say.
Can you hear me? I heard that the Global Fish Watch, the collaboration with the DiCaprio Foundation and Google, I guess, they are trying to apply this deep learning to estimate the effort, the correct, to standardize the effort of fishing in the marine capture fisheries.
Yeah. I know the CEO as well, and I connected with him quite a long time back. But what he told that there are means India is not at the moment a priority country for them, and they will get back to me for any of the details in case if they wanted to do it in a further. But yes, of course, on a global level also they got the good backup from the Google, and might be the first company who invested particularly to understand the fisheries with the use of this AI, and so I'm aware of it. Thanks a lot, Srinath sir.
Right. So I guess that's it. We are wrap up. So once again, thanks very much, Anup. You disappeared. All right. So yeah, thanks very much. And he's my longtime friend, and he have been in touch with me for all the time, and he get some idea with the fisheries. Obviously, I was not engaged in, was not able to engage in anything of that. But he is quite an established person in the IT industry. So if any of you would like to get in touch with him, please do. He will be more than happy, I guess. Yeah. Okay. So in another 2 weeks, we'll see you again with another interesting talk. Same time, same day, in a fortnight. Thanks, everyone.
All right, guys. All the best. Thank you so much.